We are so fortunate to have White Label Advisors today with us with this beautiful workshop. Get ready for everybody in this room to not only learn, but also to experience a wonderful, like I'm just going to say, a homework assignment. So let's please give a very warm welcome to my dear friend, Christine.
Thank you, Tara. Thanks everyone for being here. It is day 2, end of the day, so we've done it. And we're just gonna make this a little bit more casual. I know that we're behind time a little bit, and I have a prior commitment that I have to get to. Ellie, she's volunteering and running another event tonight. So what I'm so excited about is that we've, through all of the panel discussions, the pitches, the keynote speakers, and the presentations today, we have touched on so many key points that we're going to be working through. So we already have a lot of kind of the data, the sources that have been presented. So we'll be able to move through it, I think, quite efficiently. So as Tara shared, the topic is purpose to performance-driven hiring. And we thought that was really important because identifying the right talent is key, and retaining that talent is key. And so we're going to walk through kind of in a very constructive way why it matters and how to build it. So we can advance to the next slide. And there's no better way to get a point across, I feel, than to tell a story and a use case. And one of our success stories at White Label is that we met with a group a number of years ago. They were referred into us because they had to make a difficult business decision and outsource a field service team. And they wanted to manage that the delivery of that hard news to that team where they had employees that had been with them for years, and let them know that the time had come where, from a margins perspective, they were switching their financial strategy from top line revenue to margin efficiency, and this was one of the first kind of areas of the company that was impacted by that decision, and they needed to downsize that team considerably, and then they were outsourcing the labor. So what we did is we talked through what a dignified kind of downsizing could look like. How could we manage a really difficult conversation in a way that set their group up for success, accurately and transparently communicated that business decision, and helped those individuals impacted, and there were about 20, go out and secure other employment. And we were successful in that, to the point where we had several of those individuals that were caught up in that riff boomerang back to us the next year. But that initial project led us into a deeper conversation because that group, they were making a change with their people ops department or HR department. And the CEO wanted to talk. We'd worked on this project together. He was interested. And that first conversation that the CEO and I had, he thought I was going to ask him about headcount and their HR tech. And we started, the very first question that I asked him was, can you tell me about your strategy and where you see your company in the next 3 to 5 years? And he literally just kind of stopped and said, what? What are we talking about? And I said his name and said, well, how do you expect me to build a people program for you if I don't know what your goals and initiatives are? What I need to care about is your product, your market, your industry, and your customer. And that led us to a really great conversation, and they were a client for 2.5 years, going from a really disorganized or maybe just not kind of well-aligned people program to helping them achieve beyond their goals and initiatives, where they were able to secure a $100 million Series C raise and merge with a Bay Area company that had 2 Apple founders who had worked with Steve Jobs. So once we started working with them, kind of mapping back to that beginning, after that kind of initial really crucial conversation with the CEO, within the first 6 months, I recommended and advised that they bring in a talent acquisition partner who knew the attributes and the core competencies for their industry. It was really, really specific. They were very narrow in tech. And any role in that organization needed to have very specific and nuanced kind of niche core competencies. And so that TA partner, actually they brought over from Tesla, and she was able to take them through this merger and increase headcount by 279%. So there's definitely value in what we're doing, and we'll kind of talk about that in a little bit. We can advance to the next slide. So really quick, as we're looking at roles and talent and org structure and why it matters, we need to look at it through two lenses. There's the short term and there's the long term. And as you're building your teams out, know that there's a run on an entrepreneurial run on entrepreneurial talent versus very mature enterprise kind of org talent. Sometimes your core team, the original founders, can stay on. Sometimes they transition out, and that's just the nature of it. We at White Label, we actually have a graph or graphic that pairs the maturity model with the business life cycle with the employee experience. And sometimes there's an exodus of the founders. It's because some of us love the entrepreneurial life. We love the chaos. And sometimes we don't transition, some do. But just know that that can happen, and I think that's okay. Sometimes that right seat isn't the right fit for that right person indefinitely, and that's okay. And we've had conversations today where I don't think we need to jump into a lot of those details. But these are good points to be thinking through by way of short term, which is less than a year for the role, and then long term, which is extending over that year hump for the role. And we can advance to the next slide. Yep. Let's take the next one. So ultimately, everything that we do within our human capital strategy and within our people programming should be mapping so that we can achieve business goals and initiatives. And it's a strategic conversation. It cannot run separately. Let's advance to the next slide. So the outline for our time together today is we're going to talk about the quantification of human capital because we can truly quantify the qualitative. We're going to talk about how to build, and then we'll have a QR code for the applied learning exercise. Feel free to do that kind of on your own time. And then, our contact information is out and about if you want to get a hold of us and kind of talk more. We can advance to the next slide. And advance to the next slide. So on the handouts that we have this wheel, and everything really derives in purpose and mission and vision and values. If we don't have that, we can't really define who we are, what we're doing, and why we're doing it. And from there, we have these outer layers. And as you're looking at this, this diagram, think about it as a metal. Pick your favorite metal. Maybe it's platinum, I don't know. But that metal typically is a conduit. And there's energy that can move from that purpose, mission, and vision and values through to building cohesive trust, bi-directional accountability, and defining a talent management philosophy. Can we advance to the next slide? So with purpose, It's a thing and it's an action. And it's really important to understand the two components of it. Can we advance to the next slide? And demonstrating the thing and then living the intention or the objective or what we do with that purpose. Advance to the next slide. So when we talk about cohesive trust, trust has been mentioned several times today. At White Label, we have a corporate training called cohesion training. And we talk about the molecular bonding that occurs when like kind of principles or energies happening. Cohesion is an actual process that binds us together. A lot of talk has happened today around culture. My definition for culture comes from the book Finite and Infinite Games by James P. Carse. It's a very kind of technical book on game theory. I recommend reading it if you're interested in kind of enhancing and understanding culture dynamics. Within that book, the author states that culture is what happens when people choose to be a people together. And so today it's been mentioned, culture can be intentional or it can be unintentional, but it happens. And that's when people are choosing to be that group together. But we want it to be psychologically safe, physically safe, and ensure that everyone is operating within the same parameters and on the same standards. So bidirectional accountability is essential. We have to build accountability into the core of what we do. If we don't, we're a dysfunctional team. We don't have attention to results. And that's when you start to get a lot of the nuanced politics within a group, managing up, and cultural erosion, where if you're thinking of kind of water flows and eddies, how erosion happens, that very much is the case within culture and cultural dynamics. I'm a huge nerd, so I like to study continuum mechanics and fluid dynamics, and that's where the quantification of this comes in. What we do as people within anthropology is very much kind of relived and demonstrated within science and physics. The talent management philosophy, as a leadership team and an executive leadership team, we have to define what acceptance, accountability, inclusion, performance, and transparency are, and what that means to us and how we're going to live by those things. So for example, within White Label, we're fully accepting. I publish through Forbes sometimes, and I wrote an article recently on how egalitarianism is better for human connection. What the talent management philosophy does is it creates an equal playing field because everyone knows the standards that they're being held to and what those standards mean and what they don't mean. And it's critical to define what things do not mean. Otherwise, it's human behavior to try to go around and find the easiest path. From someone that's managed very complex cultural transformations, I rarely say trust me because I feel like I need to earn trust, but this is one thing I really recommend if you are starting out on a new kind of journey with a new group, and you're having these values conversations and setting your standards for acceptance, accountability, inclusion, performance, and transparency. Define what they are and define what they're not, and then state those. We can advance to the next slide. So now we're going to get into how to build. Hopefully this will be a little bit more fun. And feel free to get up, move around. If you want to shout out, share a thought, please do. We can advance to the next slide. So another thing at White Label that we pass on to our clients is that system and process sometimes is everything. I'm a huge believer that within HR programming and human capital strategy, that you need to have a solid understanding of project management. And I've been through the PMP course. I've taken other people through it, and I advise my clients to go through it. Within talent acquisition, the talent acquisition component, recruiting, it is a sales process, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. But we have to understand that we are trying to attract a candidate pool of the right people that we want working within our org, and that through process mapping, identifying the interview structure, which is kind of interview flow, what do we need to be talking about first versus last, and who needs to be involved in those interview conversations at the right time. That needs to be defined before we start. And then the cultural alignment piece. The good news is that all of this can be crafted strategically so that you're intuitively attracting those candidates and not having to go acquire them or kind of more explicitly state it. We can advance to the next slide. So again, here with talent acquisition, it's a thing and it's an action. We can advance to the next slide. So the thing is that process, and the action is that we're strategically integrating the purpose plus mission, vision, values so that we're attracting people that align at their core to what we're doing. What that does, and we can advance to the next slide, is we've talked about kind of cohesion. We want that sticky bond so that when times get rough, when we have down years, when we have to run lean, or maybe there's other complications that we didn't foresee that now we're having to adapt to, that we do not have team members that are jumping ship for whatever reason. Could be for a wage, it could be for the grass is greener on the other side. But if we can be bonded kind of at that core molecular level, it's much easier to stay with a group that you feel connected to, that you belong to, and that you're fulfilled because you're working and moving something forward. Something that I had within my notes, but my computer's over there, is collective intelligence is really, really important. And there is a win-win scenario where you can be benefiting yourself, your individual needs, while you're contributing to the benefit of the group. And I call that collective intelligence. So that's applied here within interviews. Those brand values need to be incorporated into our messaging. And the talent acquisition process, if that's a sales process, we need to have a really good marketing strategy that's paired with it. And sales and marketing cannot run separately. They live together even though they're different functions, and they complement each other. So getting clear on how you want to communicate out, not only in your job postings, but in your interviews, because you're selling a candidate on your company and they're selling you on them. But we want it to be precisely paired so that their needs are filled, your needs are filled, and that together you're collectively kind of moving your goals and initiatives forward. And then role scope. Role scope answers for those core competencies, the required attributes, and determines aptitude references needed for successful performance. What we do in TA, what we're communicating in the interview process, we should know from a numbers perspective, we should be able to quantify what performance should look like on the other side once they start. So within that wheel, if you go back to that wheel and you chose your favorite metal because it's a conduit, the TA process is leading out on performance and action within the org. And we don't want to have any ambiguity or implied, conversations, but not clearly stated about what those performance expectations are. That's an entire kind of program and process to develop and build out. But just be thinking about that as you're scoping roles. Ask yourself, what does success look like on the other side? And can you set some key performance metrics to build in so that once that person is in the role and they've assimilated into the role and to the culture, and you go into that first performance conversation, that you know what performance is supposed to look like, and that you've very clearly articulated that to them, and that you've had a conversation. One thing that we do recommend is having a 30, 60, 90-day performance matrix that clearly ties back to kind of that role doc or a job description. We all have a different perspective. And so what Tara says, I hear something, and what I say, Tara hears something. We don't necessarily know if we align unless we actually talk about it. So building out a matrix and having that conversation at 30, 60, 90 days on what do you think performance means and what I think performance means helps us find any of those gaps proactively, so that we don't get into a situation 6 months or a year down the road where the manager is having to call up HR and said, I've had it with this person, I want to fire them tomorrow. That's silly, right? That should never, ever happen, because we're wise enough and strategic enough and proactive enough to get ahead of any concerns like that well ahead of time. Let's advance to the next slide. We can advance to the next slide. So with this, there's a QR code. Go ahead and if you'd like to, fill it out. It's fairly simple, but it will help you kind of think about this in a different way and apply that learning. Very, very grateful to Tara and the WeROC team for having us here. We're very passionate about what we do. What I love about our team is that we all align to our purpose in very unique and individual ways. We have all had life experiences that brought us together to essentially want to provide the most poignant organizational transformations. And we can advance to the next slide. So thank you for your time. It means a lot. Feel free to stop by the table after. Ellie and I are going to jet out, but it's been a pleasure being here. And if you have any questions, we're happy to talk. Our contact information is there, and we hope it's been meaningful. And have a great afternoon.